In his book, Toxic Charity, Robert Lupton tells of how his own Presbyterian church went out onto a mission in a remote Honduran village. Now, at the time, the congregants observed that in order for the village to have water, the women would have to walk multiple miles over the course of several hours, bearing the heat of the day's sun, just to make sure that the village was properly supplied. And so the church immediately found her role. She chose then to come to the rescue to these people. So they coordinated with these outside well drilling engineers. They covered all of the expenses to install a pump for the village and totally change their experience. And everybody rejoiced, and all the villagers celebrated. So the following year, when they returned, they wanted to see how the pump was doing, and then also to move forward into another area where they could help this community. But they noticed that once again, the women were carrying their jugs for miles over the course of several hours. And when they looked at the pump, they noticed that the pump was broken. No one had fixed it. So that year, they fixed the pump again. That was their project. Then the next year, same situation, and they replaced the pump again. This pattern repeated itself year after year after year until the church understood that the villagers were simply waiting for their benefactors to fly in and to just rescue them from their problems. And they realized unintentionally they had created a welfare system that instead of elevating the people out of their hardships, they were actually funding it. And worse, they were hurting the people that they had intended to help. And I say hurting because by offering free labor from outside companies, the missionaries were actually taking jobs away from local workers who needed the income. They disempowered the villagers by teaching them to just wait and to reach for handouts rather than to take ownership of their own community, which the result of that is it just hurts local pride as well. So Robert Lupton's point, though, is that this is a problem that is not isolated to his own church. It's actually systemic in charity itself. And yet he says every year 1.5 million people continue these short-term mission trips at the expense of $2 billion with the fruit that it yields little to no improvement in communities that they're serving whatsoever. So he's offering this reflection to a gathering of church volunteers. And Lupton explains to them this idea. He says, hey, how about instead of approaching missionary work as rescuers, churches become partners to the local leaders in the communities that they're serving. Instead of doing all the work for them in free labor, what if they paid local laborers and businesses so that they could support families and give them income? Instead of free one-time handouts, what if they focus on things like microloans where those they're serving accept some responsibility? They give them job training and projects that are aimed at self-sufficiency. In other words, what if we actually empowered people? But that doesn't happen. Why? And one woman in the audience that he was serving, visibly frustrated with all the ideas that he was sharing, jumps up and says, because it's easier. Churches want their members to feel good about serving the poor, but no one really wants to become involved in these messy relationships. At least someone said the quiet part out loud, because now the real conversation can begin. Who are they really serving, if that's true? And I think she's right. What she laid bare was that their admirable charitable works were never really about the poor, but rather the gratification that the missionaries received by serving them. In other words, something about love of God is broken here. And it's in this space that our Lord's words take on whole new force. You cannot serve both God and Mammon. Now, in the immediate sense, and what most homilists will draw attention to today, is that this parable with the dishonest steward is meant to challenge the orientation of our efforts. All of us have skills, we all have intelligence and influence to varying degrees and different respects. But that's not good enough, because so did Jeffrey Epstein, and he used those powers for evil. And so many homilists will reflect on the Lord's real question, which is, what if you used your powers for the kingdom? What might the world, the culture, or the church herself look like if all of us used our intelligence, our skills, and our influence for God? But what the experience of the missionaries is showing us, and what Robert Lupton is trying to underscore, is that that's insufficient. The clash between God and Mammon requires that we go deeper into an examination of the heart. And this is because all of us, myself included, we all suffer from an impulse that makes evil attractive. Like when someone's tailgating you and you think, I'm just gonna tap my brakes and dare them to hit my car. Or you break your Lenten fast for the 100th time because after all, it was a stressful day and you deserve that cake that you meant to set aside for Jesus. In the spiritual life, we call that concupiscence. And the concept of mammon really points to it. And so Jesus' real point underneath it all, if we really want to love God and serve him in love, then we cannot serve mammon also. But even in our hearts, we can straddle the issue. And when we do, it means simply, Jesus doesn't yet have all of me. And partial love doesn't work in the spiritual life. I'll give you an example from my own life where this really hit me in a new way. I remember one time I was preparing to interpret Mass for a deaf guy in a nursing home. And I worked my behind off to get ready for this liturgy. I spent hours translating the readings and the prayers of the liturgy. I was rethinking how to express them in American Sign Language. I practiced in the privacy of my own room to make sure that my signs were smooth. I timed myself to make sure I was keeping pace with the pace of the liturgy. I practically memorized the Mass for this guy. So I show up, and in about 2 minutes into the Mass, he falls asleep. And here I am, signing to a guy who's not even conscious. And everything inside of me wanted to run right up to that guy and be like, do you know how much work I put into this? You better wake up and focus. But I heard the Lord whispering into my heart, did you do this for him or for you? Because if you really did it for him and you're trying to please me, the Lord, then should he not have the freedom to engage or disengage as is appropriate to him? And that's when I realized I was angry, but not because this deaf guy did anything wrong, but because he deprived me of the gratification that I wanted in helping somebody who needs me. Well, there's something broken there. And rather than being content that I had served the Lord, I was discontent that my needs were not met. And my eyes were opened, and I realized Mammon still had its branding in my heart. So, it is good, as many will do, to consider the strengths that God has given you and how to, and to what degree, place them at the service of his kingdom. But it's equally as important to go deeper and examine the purity of those intentions, and in doing so, to reach the perfection of love.